for those of you tuning in, my name is Michelle Herrera. I work for Randolph Brooks Federal Credit Union. We are a local credit union here in the Seguin, San Antonio area, and today we're going to talk about financial tips for 2022, specifically the importance of budgeting, the importance of using credit wisely, and then the importance of saving and investing. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things. And as far as where I stand, do you have a preference on anywhere? Okay, all right. So we're going to start by talking about budgeting, because I find that budgeting is one of the things that people really hate to do, but is one of the most important foundations for having a good personal financial situation. So when it comes to budgeting, let's first break down the idea of a budget. I think a lot of people are adverse to the idea of a budget because they don't want to be told what to do with their money. They want to do what they want. And sometimes, let's be honest, people don't want to know the truth about their financial situation. So instead of looking at the situation, they may shy away from it. But I want to encourage people to really sit down and look at their finances, because I think more than anything, it'll help reduce stress. It'll help us to get a clearer picture of our situation. And really, a budget is just simply a plan for managing your money during a certain time period. And so for most people, budgets tend to be monthly. And the reason that is because we get paid on a monthly or weekly basis most of the time. So we receive our income. And then budgets also tend to happen monthly because we also get our bills at least once a month. And those are all of our expenses, the things that we have to pay for to live. And so typically most people budget monthly. So what I tell people is, before the bills are due, select a date, typically prior month before the first bill is due, like a mortgage or rent type situation, and sit down and look at what your expected bills for the following month are going to be. That really gives you an idea of kind of what your month is going to look like. The reason I say that is because when you're budgeting, a couple of things that budgets help us to do is first take control of our money, right? When we're budgeting, we're in control because we're able to see what the truth and the reality of our financial situation is. The other thing is, if we need to, and let me take it a step back. Budgets are always going to constantly be monitored and modified. These are things that are going to change because of the amount of our bills that we might have or might be incurring. And what budgets help us to do is make sure that every month we're living within our means and what we have available. And so the earlier that we start planning, we don't have to wait till the month before. You can start planning and pre-planning as far in advance as you want. Just know that it may not be exact because of fluctuations in the cost of things. So budgets also, speaking of that, help us to make sure that we are sticking to a savings plan. When we have a plan attached to our budget, we're more likely to think about the small spending that we make, which we'll talk more about in just a second. Budgets also, as I mentioned, help reduce financial stress. Believe it or not, when we are aware of our financial situation and we feel secure knowing that our bills are going to be paid, we're much more relaxed and at ease rather than worried that we don't have what we need for the coming month. Last but not least, budgets help us to identify spending leaks. And what spending leaks are what we call discretionary expenses, things that we would spend money on that we don't always think about, that aren't very expensive, should I say. And the reason that these little items are important to pay attention to is because sometimes this is the money that we spend without thinking. And when we spend money without thinking and we don't account for it, it can tend to disappear a lot easier. And we don't pay attention because it's a small amount. So for example, this example here, the latte factor, focuses on the idea of spending money on a coffee, a daily coffee. Now this may or may not relate to you, but this is just one example, and this could be anything. It doesn't have to be coffee. It can be going out to eat. It can be fun expenses. It can be expenses that your children might be incurring, like maybe you have high school kids that like to, that get an allowance every week or 2 weeks or whatever it might be, right? Any kind of expense that's extra that anyone in the family might be utilizing or using or spending. So the coffee always gets picked on, but we'll use the example of $3.25 a day, which roughly equates to about $25. So if you roughly spend about $25 a week on discretionary items, meaning going out to eat, coffee, any vices, gambling like lotto tickets, or maybe you like a treat from the convenience store or breakfast tacos or whatever it is, right? If you spend $25 a week, that equates to about $100 a month. $100 a month is about $1,200 a year on stuff that you're not even paying attention to your spending. So where am I going with this? Well, when we talk about budgets, two main things that you have to do when you first start budgeting. One, write down all of your expenses so that you have the awareness of what your current financial situation is. But two, also look at where is your money potentially leaking? Where are some items that you might be spending on that you don't realize is wasting your money on the monthly average, on a monthly basis, excuse me. So that being said, let's go back a slide. And this is a breakdown of our budgeting equation. I think a lot of people get caught up thinking that budgets are very difficult and have to be intense and have to be these huge documents with all these numbers and figures, but in reality, budgets can really look like anything that you want them to, as long as it's something that helps you to stay on track with your spending and your savings goals, okay? So the three main components of a budget are income, which is the money that we receive for our work or our business, whatever kind of income we might receive. And there's two kinds, gross and net. Gross means the total amount prior to taxes being taken or any other deductions. And then net is going to be what we call our take-home pay. And that's the amount that we need to focus on, because that amount is the amount that we have available to spend in our account, in our check that we receive, that goes towards the expenses, the bills, okay? And there's three kinds of expenses that we typically incur on a monthly basis. Those are fixed, variable, and periodic. Fixed expenses are the ones that happen every single month that I would say are typically the bigger items. Your car payment if you have a loan, your home payment if you have a mortgage loan, your rent. Those every month are going to be the same amount. The ones that are going to fluctuate, though, are variable expenses. And these are things like our utilities, electricity, water, gas for our vehicles, groceries and going out to eat. And they vary because of the cost of those items. And we've seen that happen a lot lately because the cost of fuel determines the cost of all these other items, especially groceries and things of that nature, and any items that we need to buy like clothing. So because of that, those variable costs can fluctuate and increase or decrease depending on the supply and demand. Periodic expenses, these are also very important. These are not monthly, but they might happen periodically throughout the year. This could be considered a car repair or registration for your vehicle or holiday gifts or birthday gifts, things that we don't normally spend money on monthly, but they might happen at a certain time of the year. And then lastly, savings. Now, this would be typically considered a fixed expense, but I make it its own section because I like people to kind of understand that there's multiple types of savings that you might incorporate into your own personal financial plan, okay? And there's two that are really important, but I would definitely say all three of these could be potentially something you would want to include on your budget. So within your budget, when you go write down your bills, you also want to write down, okay, so much for emergencies under fixed expenses, so much for retirement under fixed expenses, and then so much for goals or dreams also under fixed expenses, okay? But we're going to go into it a little bit further in detail because I want you to understand the importance of the percentage. So I'm going to give you some recommendations. So for these savings goals, what's recommended for our budget, now this is a big one because this, like retirement, is not something that happens overnight. So for emergencies, what's recommended is to put as much as you can each month away, but the bigger end goal is what you're looking at. And you're looking at the end goal for your emergency fund to be about a total of 3 to 6 months of your total monthly expenses. So if, for example, if your bills all total every month are $1,000, then you want to have between $3,000 to $6,000 stocked away in an emergency fund. Well, what is the purpose of this? Emergency funds typically are stocked away into a savings account, somewhere that's easily accessible, and in case you lose your job, which we all saw that happen to somebody we know and love during COVID, right? So emergency funds come in to take care of those situations that catch us off guard. If you can't work, if you're ill, something comes up, an out-of-pocket expense that you weren't planning, life, right? And people always ask me, well, what happens if I'm trying to save for my emergency fund and I have to use all that money? Well, that's just life. At least you have more than you would have had if you never would have started saving for emergencies. So emergency funds is going to be something that's always up and down. And I've been teaching this class for a long time. I've never had anybody say, oh, I've saved too much. Just keep saving. Even when you get to a point where you're over that limit, save more, because when that moment comes and you need to utilize those funds, you have that emergency account already fully stocked, right? Because there's going to be times when you can put more. There's going to be times when you won't be able to put as much. And that extra that you put here and there is going to help to kind of offset those times when you have those tighter months, okay? Retirement funds are what we call pay yourself first, and that recommendation is about 10% of your monthly income. This is for future you. When you're no longer working and you need money for retirement, 10% is the recommendation, but it really depends on the kind of lifestyle that you plan to live, as well as any of the expenses that you plan to have at that point, right? If your house is going to be paid off, well, you may not have rent or a mortgage, but if you're not going to be living in a place where there's no cost for that, you're going to have to take that into consideration when you make plans for how much you need to save for retirement, okay? So again, it's all personal, depends on your situation, but 10% at least is what's recommended of your monthly income, okay? And then dreams, that's anything else. That's vacation, that's buying a car, that's sending your kids to college, that's whatever it is for you, that's your specific dreams. And what's recommended for that is about 5% of your monthly income. Again, very able to be should be personalized and customized to your situation, okay? All right. Another tip that I'm going to give y'all before I move into saving and investing is I would also highly recommend that not only do you write down your monthly expenses to get started, but I like to utilize a planner or a calendar, because I kind of find that when I live my budget without a calendar, there's times where I feel like, gosh, why do I feel like I don't have any money? Why is it so tight this month? That sometimes is because of the way that paychecks may fall in conjunction with those bills. So if you have a very heavy beginning of the month where the bills are really heavy, then that could be telling you like, hey, I really need to start maybe potentially moving some of these bills out to different dates. And some of your billers may work with you in that regard to let you move some stuff around so you're not feeling the pain or the pinch in that moment every single month, right? Or maybe potentially save more from the previous section where you don't have as many bills and save that so that you're not feeling that pinch when those times hit, okay? So just some tips to kind of help you, because I know sometimes when you're budgeting, we live by the paycheck sometimes, and we don't always realize kind of why we feel a certain way in a certain time of the month, but really writing down the way our bills happen, as long as, and using a calendar as well, helps us to kind of get a more visual situation. And I don't know about y'all, but there's certain times of the year where I do have more birthday gifts to buy. The holidays can be kind of strenuous and tight with our money too. So if you know and you identify those times of the year that are higher costs for you, it might also give you some ability to plan ahead. Like for example, for me, August is a very expensive month because I have a 10-year-old who needs school supplies, new clothes, new shoes, birthday because that's when she was born. So all the expenses for me happen during that time because we usually go on vacation for the summer break. So yes, don't ask me to borrow money in August because that's not that's not a good time for me. So just kind of identifying when your budget is more strenuous for you is important as well. Okay, speaking of that, as mentioned, we talked about saving a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about saving and investing now, and this kind of goes hand in hand with your retirement account as well as just some of those savings recommendations that we talked about. But first, I'm going to identify what the differences between the two are, because I think this is really important. First and foremost, saving tends to be for the short term. So if you know you need to buy a car and you're going to save some money to buy a car and you're going to need easy access to that money, that would potentially be short-term goal into a savings account, something that you're going to sock away because you know you're going to take that money out when you go buy that car. Investing, this is a little bit different. This is putting money aside for future income, benefit, or profit to meet more of long-term goals, okay? This could be something like putting money away for, oh look, I popped up with my, I moved these around a little weird. This could be putting money away for more long-term goals like retirement, as mentioned, or potentially sending your children to college and having funds for that, as well as maybe buying a house. I mean, it really depends on where you are in your particular stage of your financial life, okay? This is just another flash to what I had mentioned earlier, and I was kind of covering with you for the recommendations for retirement, emergency funds, and dreams. So we won't have to stay on this one, but I wanted y'all to get a snapshot of that. So investing, people tend to buy a house, pay for college, save for retirement. There's all sorts of reasons that people save and invest. I have a college fund and I have a discretionary account for my daughter because I don't know, maybe she's gonna want to get married soon, or when she's younger than I was, like maybe she's gonna need a car, right? There's different things that are gonna come up in her mid-teen to adult life that I may have to help her with, and so these funds are also for those long-term goals. So kind of like, I always tell people, kind of think about 10 years out. Where do you think you might need to have some money for these types of items? And those are the types of things that you might want to think about investing for, okay? So what kinds of investments are out there? Well, first and foremost, these that are down here at the bottom, I'm going to show those to you first because those are the accounts that are going to help us to save. And the nice thing about savings accounts, money markets, certificates of deposits, and U.S. savings bonds are they're all accounts that are insured by the government. So what does that mean? That means that if you see on TV that there's a stock market dip and the value of all these accounts has dropped, well, that's not going to impact the account balances for your savings accounts, your checking accounts, your money markets, any of these, because that money is all insured and protected. But because it's insured and protected, it also means that you're not going to earn a lot of interest on this money, okay? So where do you earn interest? Well, when you invest, you jump into some of these other riskier types of investments. This isn't all. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate. There's all sorts of cryptocurrency and things that are happening now that are not even on this list. My point to you is you have to find what's comfortable for you before you invest. Definitely get some advice. Just know that there's lots of people out there who can give you guidance, like financial advisors, stockbrokers. There's people, yes, and because they are professionals in those fields, they're probably going to charge you a fee, but that fee most of the time is worth it because of the amount of interest that you earn on these investments, okay? But again, check with your financial institution. Many times they can help provide guidance or at least give you an upper hand to know where to find some of these resources to help you get started, okay? So when it comes to these types of investments, the two most common items on here that people tend to utilize are stocks and mutual funds. And they're very similar. Most of the time, mutual funds utilize stocks and bonds and a variety of these types of investments. So if you are somebody who has, let's say, a 401k with your work, or if you're a teacher and it's a 403b, many times those accounts, those aren't actually the investments. What are the investments are the mutual funds within those accounts. And most of those mutual funds target certain dates or time frames that align with the time that you might be retiring when you hit 60, 65 years old, okay? And these accounts may have different types of investments within them that are going to be better for your situation, and they kind of make sure that they become a little bit riskier when you're younger and more conservative as you get older, so that you're not having the opportunity of losing a lot of money as you're approaching the time that you will be probably starting to utilize those funds, like when you get close to retirement. So mutual funds are similar to that. If that's something you want, a lot of times your banks and your credit unions, where you do business for your personal finance, typically have financial advisors that can help you set up these types of accounts. They also can help you, or at least give you guidance on how to start with the stock market. You can also DIY this. You can open an account with E-Trade. You can do all sorts of things to start utilizing those funds and kind of investing in the stock market as well. Real estate is property. That's obviously another great one right now because the real estate market is booming. So just know that there's lots of different ways for you to utilize those funds to invest. Gambling is on there to be kind of a little ironic. A lot of people say investing's like gambling, it's very risky, but the reality is you can't do research to see how well a slot machine did, or how the grocery store sold the lotto tickets. But you can do research on a lot of these types of investments. And I didn't touch on collectibles, but I will say collectibles tend to be rare items like antiques, things like that, and those can also bring value to your investment portfolio. Just make sure that you get it appraised by a legitimate appraiser. Don't just say and look it up online, because looking online doesn't always verify the amount that it actually is, okay? All right, so that being said, when you invest, starting sooner is always better, right? We know that. We're not math majors, but we know that the earlier you start, the more you put away, the better off you're going to be. However, I'm going to show you what the progression could potentially look like. So with this investment, this is an investment that has an assumption that 3 people, a 20-year-old, a 35-year-old, and a 45-year-old, all invest $5,000 a year for every year at the end of each year with a 6% annual growth rate, where all earnings are reinvested. What that means is when you earn money in those accounts, people are not pulling those funds. They're leaving the funds in the account and letting those funds kind of compound on those deposits. So then you're earning interest not only on the money that you're putting in there, the $5,000 every year, but also the interest that you're earning. So what's happening with these investments when you do that is what's called compounding interest. And compounding interest is the differentiating factor that makes investing more powerful than saving, because you're typically earning a higher interest, you're leaving the money for a much longer term, and so the 6% isn't changing, but what's changing is the balance in the account. And the larger that balance becomes, the more powerful that 6% interest becomes. So this person who was 20 started out by putting $5,000 a year, but over the course of those 45 years, that person put $225,000 of their own money and came out with a little over $1 million after 45 years, okay? The 35-year-old put in $150,000 of their own money and came away with a little over $395,000. And then the 45-year-old put in $100,000 and walked away with a little over $183,000. So not too shabby. Even though the person started at 45 and only invested for 20 years, 83, almost 84,000 is nothing to sneeze at, right? So everybody had the potential to earn compounded interest, much more than if they would have just saved, and much more if they never would have started. So this is the power of investing and why it's different than just saving, okay? And if you ever have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your financial institution. Many times they have resources for you, and it's a game changer. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about credit for a few minutes before we finish up our session for today. So when it comes to credit, I'm going to give you a couple of tips to help you just understand what credit really is, the important items to kind of look at when you're thinking about utilizing credit, and then just some items to help protect you also, because I think a lot of times for credit, we don't always take care of the information that's listed out there in the system about us, meaning our credit reports and scores. So I'm going to give you some resources to check for when you want to look at your credit report and credit score, okay? So first and foremost, credit is borrowing somebody else's money to buy something that you want, typically with the intent that you are going to pay it back, right? And you're going to pay some interest, some additional costs or fees to use that money that you're borrowing. You have to be at least 18 years or older, and in some cases 21 for certain credit cards. And there's many times when your credit history is reviewed. A lot of people say, I used credit, did you check my credit? So the term credit gets used in a lot of different ways. But here, when people say they use their credit to obtain these services, many times they mean because they are either trying to make a purchase, create these new services or contracts, or apply for jobs. And so typically in those 3 cases, the potential is there for somebody on the other end of those products or services to ask to review your credit history, okay? So here they're going to ask to review your credit history because you're asking to borrow money, and they want to check your credit history to see how likely are you to pay us back. And what they use is your credit report, your credit score, to see if you've paid other loans back in the past. So it's not just your score that determines if you get approved, it's your credit score, it's your credit history, as well as your income that usually determine whether or not you can get approved for these items. When it comes to services, creating contracts like renting an apartment or a house, or potentially utilizing, starting new accounts for utilities like water, gas, electricity, starting insurance policies, or even cell phone accounts. Those companies are going to ask you to review your credit history before you create these accounts. And they do that more, not because you're creating, not because you are going to pay back and borrow money, but because you're creating the potential for an account, and if you don't pay it, they want to kind of see, does this person have a history of not paying these kinds of accounts? The other thing is, this paying your rent, paying your cell phone, paying your insurance, unless you're told that it's going to help your credit, and usually it's going to be told to you, most of the time those accounts don't help build credit history. But what they can do is they can hurt you if you don't pay them. So these types of accounts are really important to make sure that we keep our end of the bargain when we create these contracts, that we're making sure that we pay them, because we don't want these accounts to damage all of the hard work that we've created by trying to build our credit history and credit report. And then last but not least, employers. Depending on the field that you go into, some employers do review your credit history. I can tell you honestly, RBFCU checks our credit. But we also work in a financial institution with sensitive information access, as well as, obviously I'm here talking to you about how to have good credit. They're not going to send a lady who has bad credit to talk to you about these things. So they check our credit report, they review our background. There's lots of different checks and balances within different career paths. I will tell you that financial institutions, high-level security type positions like law enforcement, military, the higher you go in the school districts, I mean, there's just lots of different positions that where you have the opportunity to have access to funds, and the higher your positions become, typically there's going to be a credit review of those folks, okay? So just kind of know that it's best, if you're concerned about having bad credit, it's better to have no credit history than it is to have bad credit, because that could potentially keep you from getting some of those positions. All right. When it comes to credit reports, there's lots of websites. There's lots of apps and things where you can go to check your credit score and report, but annualcreditreport.com is a great website. It's free. You can check it once a year, and you get 3 free credit reports on there: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, which are the 3 main credit bureaus. And the reason that these are important to review is because when you go apply for loans, many times those 3 companies are the 3 companies that a lot of these financial institutions look to see the history that you have with those organizations. So when they're looking at your credit report to see if you could get approved for the loan that you're asking to borrow over here, they're going to probably use one of these credit reports. Now, there's different kinds out there. There's FICO reporting, and then there's also what we call Vantage Score, and there's different credit reports within those credit models. So just know that sometimes it could be one or the other, and so if you're wondering, you can always ask your lender, so that way you can look up the specific type of report that you're looking for, okay? You can order them once from all 3 companies, or order every 4 months, like a different one, to kind of have a pulse or touch on your report. But just know that these might be different. So I always tell people, if you've never done it before, pull all 3 at the beginning. And the reason I say that is because what's reported to each one might vary a little bit, and so it's good to kind of see what's listed on each one rather than wait 4 months to see if something is wrong on the other one. So if you've never done it, pull them all at the same time. That's my advice. And then if you need to make any corrections, these are what we call disputes. If there's any information on your credit report that's not listed correctly, then I would recommend get that corrected as quickly as possible. And what you have to do is you have to contact each credit bureau individually, let them know the corrections that you need to make on each report, and then they'll fix that. They have a window of time where they have to respond to you with an update of that request of corrections that you've made for them, okay? I'll give you all an example. So before I had been married, this was like, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, because I'm a lot older now. And I remember, so my name was Michelle Rodriguez, and there was probably about 5 Michelle Rodriguez's that were listed under the address section of my credit report that were not me. Dallas and Corpus and Houston and all these towns that I had never lived in. So even though it's not an account under somebody's name, if there's any address or information affiliated to you that's not you, you want to have that removed, because you never want that person's information to accidentally be put on your credit report. Okay? All right. So this is the range of those 3 scores, of those 3 credit bureaus. Their scoring ranges from about 300 to 850, 300 being the lowest, 850 being the highest. The reason this is important is because this is one aspect of what gets reviewed by your lenders when you ask to borrow money. Obviously, you want to see that you have a higher score. But again, credit history is also very important, meaning the habits you create when you borrow, how quickly you pay back. So that, speaking of that, there's 5 main components that determine your credit score. Some other, like this is FICO, but Vantage can be a little bit different. But for the most part, paying on time is the biggest. 35% is your payment history. 30% is your debt level, so not accumulating or maxing out your credit cards. And if you are maxing them out, making sure they get paid in full each month rather than carrying a balance. Because if you carry a balance and they're maxed out, that could potentially bring your score down, okay? The length of history, meaning the longer that you've been using credit, potentially that could also help, because that shows that you have a very stable credit history. Inquiries and new credit. If you've ever heard somebody say, don't apply for that because that can bring your credit score down. Yes, over applying for things, or anytime you apply, it could potentially bring your score down. But once you pay things back and you get back on track, it might take a few cycles, it can bring your score back up, okay? So 2 examples. 1, you decide, I want to go get a bunch of credit cards at the mall because I want to shop. Every place you go that's a different vendor, a different retail store, that is one individual hit on your score that can bring your score down. If you are shopping for a car or a house and you're shopping around for the best deal and you go to a bunch of different dealerships or home lenders, as long as you do all of them within 30 days, they count as one ding on your score. So there's different types of credit inquiries. If you're going and asking to borrow a bunch of money, that looks kind of suspicious. But if you're looking for one item and you're trying to just find the best deal, that's different. So those do impact your score differently, okay, and the dings that you take against your score. And then last but not least, the types of credit in use. If eventually you think you might want to buy a home, you would need to utilize 2 different types of credit. Revolving, which is like a credit card. So revolving credit, like credit cards or line of credits, are looked at by your lender because they want to see that you can be trusted with an open-ended loan that you can then use and pay back responsibly. They also want to see that you can use what's called installment loans. Installment loans are different because those are loans where you borrow, let's say you're buying a car. You borrow one big chunk of money to buy the car, and then you pay it back in monthly installment payments. And that shows that you can also pay back larger amounts in installments, which are like a house, right? So having a good mix of credit is also really important with your credit score, but also with building credit and also helping you to kind of get to the point of eventually home ownership if that's your goal, okay? That's a big loan. So they want to make sure that you are going to be able to pay that back. That's really important. All right. So if there's any questions, this is my contact information. You can also email me at financialeducation@RBFCU. I am Michelle Herrera, not Jennifer Crawford. So feel free to contact me if there's any questions that you have about any of the topics that we covered today. If anyone is online, thanks for joining us today. And if not, then feel free to reach out to me, or also check out our website because we always have webinars on there as well, and they're free to the public. If you would rather stay at home in your pajamas, like, I don't blame you. But we're at rbfcu.org under the Learn tab, and we are always available to you if necessary. So thanks again for being with us, and y'all have a good evening.